So here's another illustration of the slippery slope argument. Let's check the variable n here. And here stands for a harmless or barely controversial proposition. So ibig sabihin, the argument will start or will have a harmless proposition. And then it would include a series of proposition that would lead to a harmful proposition, or would lead to Armageddon, or to yung yung total apocalypse. So may exaggeration dito like the strawman, but in this case it would show you a series of events that would cause to the harmful proposition. Alright, example here is gun ownership. Example dito is gun ownership. If you're going to own a gun, which is letter N, initially it's not harmless at all, mainly because it's for defense purposes. Ganun din dito sa gay TV characters. Wala namang harm dyan. Pero eventually, as the argument develops, ang pinaka letter X mo na yan, o yung harmful proposition, would lead to interspecies marriage. So ibig sabihin, interspecies marriage, pwede nang eventually ang tao ipapakasal sa aso, ipapakasal sa unggoy, ipapakasal sa pusa. That's interspecies marriage. Gun ownership, ito letter X mo is widespread gang massacre. So again, two important elements that we have to examine if we're going to consider slippery slope as an answer in our exam is, number one is the letter N. There has to be a harmless proposition in the fallacy. Next is the letter X. The letter X is the harmful proposition that usually makikita natin to sa conclusion. And then the third element is the series of events that lead to the harmful proposition. Okay, that's slippery slope. In other words, ang slippery slope is a series of false cause fallacy. Okay, so ibig sabihin sa slippery slope fallacy, marami tayong makitang false cause fallacy. Kasi ang false cause, isang cause lang, tapos isang effect. Sa slippery slope, maraming cause, tapos eventually ang pinaka-final effect is a harmful proposition. Slippery slope, let's check the definition here, asserting that if you allow A to happen, then Z will consequently happen too. Therefore, A should not happen. Yung A na tinutukoy natin dito is not a harmful event. Pero yung C na tinutukoy natin dito is the harmful event. Now, if you don't want the C to happen, sabi dito, A should not happen. The problem with this reasoning is that it avoids engaging with the issue at hand and instead shifts attention to baseless extreme hypotheticals. Yung baseless extreme hypotheticals dito is yung harmful proposition. Example, yung pag magkakaroon ng gay character sa TV would lead to interspecies marriage. The merits of the original argument are then tainted by unsubstantiated conjecture. Ibig sabihin ng conjecture dito yung assumption, opinion, na walang substance, na baseless yung claim. Example, Colin Closet asserts that if you allow same-sex couples to marry, then the next thing we know, ito yung letter N, na variable, yung harmless. Initially, it's harmless. Then the next thing we know, we'll be allowing people to marry their parents. So, nagkakaroon ng exaggeration, their cars. So, ito yung series of effects, and bonobo monkeys. That is if we allow same-sex marriage. Okay, this is slippery slope. Slippery slope kasi pinakita dito sa slope na to yung series of causes and series of effects. Na meron namang harmless, nandun yung letter A, harmless proposition, tapos nandito yung letter Z, nagiging harmful proposition. That's slippery slope. Again, ang slippery slope po can be a series of false cause fallacy. So as indicated here, slippery slope is a variety of the false cause fallacy. Conclusion of an argument rests upon an alleged chain reaction, and there is not sufficient reason to think that the chain reaction will actually take place. So nagkakaroon ng chain reaction. Example, immediate steps should be taken to outlaw pornography. So yung letter N natin dito is we're talking about pornography once and for all. The continued manufacture and sale of pornographic material will almost certainly lead to an increase. So ito na yung effect. Ito yung effect. Will lead to an increase in sex-related crimes. Magkakaroon daw ng mga krimen such as rape and incest. This in turn, another effect. So may series tayo ng effects. This in turn will gradually erode the moral fabric of society. So may morality na. And result in an increase in crimes of all sorts. Eventually, a complete disintegration of law and order will occur, leading in the end to the total collapse of civilization. So nagkaroon ka lang ng pornography dito, it will eventually lead to the end of civilization. Okay, this is slippery slope. Medyo may pagka-strawman, pero kasi sa strawman, hindi pinapakita yung series of events. Okay, sa false cause, mali yung effect dun sa binigay na cause. So again, this is another illustration for the false cause fallacy. If A, then B, may series of events there, then B, then C, and then D. That's your slippery slope illustration. So next tayo is weak analogy. So when we have weak analogy, an argument based on an analogy where the compared cases are insufficiently similar to justify the comparison's conclusion. So analogy dito, again, we're comparing two particular objects. A mouse used for the computer and then the actual mouse na animal. So let's check if we are, as mentioned here, we are comparing cases na hindi naman similar. Pero dyan na justify natin merong similarities dun sa dalawang pinagkukumpara natin. That's weak analogy. So fate is like a Wi-Fi. So we try to compare fate to a Wi-Fi because ang fate is also invisible, ang Wi-Fi is also invisible. But it has the power, it's invisible, but it has the power to connect you to what you need. So this is weak analogy. Another example is this one, yung physical appearance of this image with this image. Just because one argument resembles, so may resemblance of this image with this image, doesn't mean that the cats can fly in space. So if we assume to have the same applicability, we're committing weak analogy. Another example, 1 is a number, 2 is a number, then since we follow the same structure and then pattern, 1 is 2. Kasi kinumpara natin yung 1 as a number, kinumpara natin yung 2 as a number. So meaning to say 1 is 2. Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. So kinumpara natin yung buhay at saka yung box ng chocolates here. Now, let's not get confused with the fallacies of grammatical analogy, which uses the word analogy as well. So we're discussing about weak analogy. Wag nating lituin yung sarili natin with the fallacies of grammatical analogy, which uses the word analogy also. Now, under the grammatical analogy, if you can still remember, which was discussed from our previous lecture, grammatical analogy uses the word analogy as well. Sabi doon, analogy here, under this fallacy, it tries to compare also two things. Now, ang kinukumpara natin under grammatical analogy is the fallacy of composition and division. For the fallacies of composition and division, si Chris Paul, tandaan natin, we have the word C, which is the composition, which stands for the word composition, and then the letter P. So meaning to say, if we are to remember these letters with this fallacy, this composition starts from the fallacy ng parts, and then eventually it develops to the whole. So ibig sabihin, kung anong nakikita nating application sa parts, may apply din daw natin sa whole. That's for the composition. So ibig sabihin, we're comparing two things here, the parts and then the whole. Division, kabaliktaran ng composition, we start, si Dwayne Wade, we start from the whole. D stands for division and then W stands for the whole. Meaning to say, this fallacy starts from the whole. Kung ano daw totoo sa pangkalahatan, yun din daw ang makikita natin sa parte nito. So what is true with the whole is also true with the parts. So that's grammatical analogy. Wag natin i-confuse natin, don't get confused with weak analogy. So again, for weak analogy, we're also comparing two things. And then we assume that after the similarity that we can see on those two things, the other variable also has the same quality na meron yung naunang variable. Okay, for example, this is Harper's, for example, if we're going to buy an LED TV, for instance, iba ang qualities although they have the same size. Let's say we have a 32-inch LED TV. Okay? Yung isa Samsung, yung isa TCL. Although may parehas silang LED, parehas silang ng size, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have also the same features. Okay, now if we assume that they have the same features kasi nga parehas sila, we're committing the fallacy of weak analogy. Okay, in this example, for example, dito tayo sa isang example, yung kay Harper at saka kay Crowley. Now, it's mentioned here, Harper's new car is bright blue. Yun yung quality niya. Tapos, Crowley's new car is also bright blue. So, meron tayong similarity between two things. Tapos, yung other quality that Harper's new car has is it has leather upholstery. Meron ding leather upholstery dun kay Crowley. Tapos, ang naiiba is it gets excellent gas mileage. Although they have the same qualities and properties, it doesn't necessarily follow that Crowley's new car also has an excellent mileage. Now, if you do that, you're committing the fallacy of weak analogy. Alright? That's for the weak analogy. Another example for weak analogy is we compare two variables again. The flow of electricity. Ito, itong una. The flow of electricity here as an example. Through a wire is similar to the flow of water through a pipe. Parehas daw yung flow ng kuryente dito kasi it's also a pipe. Tapos kaparehas din siya ng flow ng tubig dito sa pipe. Obviously, a larger diameter pipe will carry a greater flow of water than ito. Ito yung diameter, for example, ng tubig. Ito. Yung lawak ng bilog. The large diameter pipe will carry a great flow of water than a pipe of small diameter. That's correct. Now, that is for the water. Now, if we're going to apply that to the electricity, magkakaiba yan. Now, if you're going to apply the same kind of quality with the water and then dun sa electricity, we might be committing the fallacy of weak analogy. Okay? A large diameter wire, so ibig sabihin, pag may malaki kang diameter dito ng kable ng kuryente, that would also suggest that it would carry a greater flow of electricity than the small diameter of wire. Okay, so if you do that, we're committing the fallacy of weak analogy. So, ibig sabihin, iba yung property ng tubig, iba yung property ng kuryente. Ang sinusunod natin ditong similarity is the diameter. Diameter of the pipe and diameter of the pipe of the electricity and then the water. So, let's try to do a recap for the fallacy of weak induction. First is ad verecundiam. Ibig sabihin ng ad verecundiam, we question the arguer because we question the qualification and then credibility of the arguer, yung speaker. Kasi anong qualification ng speaker to make such claim in the statement? Okay, that's for ad verecundiam. So, ibig sabihin for ad verecundiam is credibility and then qualifications. Ando naman yung word na unqualified authority. So, we have two letters that we have to remember. Credibility and then qualifications. Now, if we assume that such speaker is actually saying the truth despite of his unqualified despite of his yung non-credibility na sinasabi niya, we're committing ad verecundiam. Next is appeal to ignorance or ad ignorantiam. Ang ad ignorantiam is mananatiling totoo ang claim ko. My claim will remain to be truthful in so far that you cannot disprove my claim. Okay? In so far that you cannot disprove my claim, hanggat hindi mo siya ma-falsify, mananatiling truthful siya. Okay? Another, baliktarin lang natin to yung TF. Ang isang claim mananatiling mali in so far na hindi mo siya napapatunayang totoo. Okay, that's for ad ignorantiam. Ang example na pwede nating i-tandaan dito is the example on ghosts. Okay, in so far na ang ghost ay mananatiling hindi totoo. In so far na wala kayong mapapakitang ito, mananatiling false. In so far that you cannot provide me with truthful facts or evidence. Okay? A lack of evidence, as mentioned under this fallacy, is not an evidence at all. That's for ad ignorantiam. Next is hasty generalization. Ang tandaan natin for hasty generalization is the general pwedeng general public o yung holistic kasi. Titingnan natin dito is the conclusion. Ang conclusion appears to be holistic. When I say holistic, yun yung pagiging general. Okay, so ibig sabihin, if we're going to check the conclusion, it has to be holistic. Holistic in a sense na nilalahat. Okay, that's why it's called generalization. Now, the reason why nilalahat ito is because of the premise use. Yung premise use dito are the specific or particular variables that were acquired from the totality of the population. Right? Ulitin ko, we use a portion of the population, and then after using that portion of population, we assume that it is also applicable to the totality or whole of the population. That's hasty generalization. So the example that we gave here are the Arabs. Okay, may nakita kang dalawang Arabo na naka-violente. So ibig sabihin, lahat ng Arabo ay violente. Okay, for the false cause, we have, obviously, nandun yung sagot, we have the cause and then we have the effect. Okay? Now, the effect happened because we assume that the cause has something to do with it. An example that we had in here, yung fallacy na binigay natin dito, pwede yung mga pamahiin. Ang dahilan kung bakit bagsak ako, for example, bagsak sa exam, is because hindi ako naligo. Okay, ligo. So, ang cause, the reason why bagsak ka sa exam is because hindi ka naligo. Right? Again, ang tatandaan natin dito for the false cause is we have to check the effect. Does the effect have something to do with the cause? Kung meron, we are committing the fallacy of false cause. For the slippery slope, tandaan natin yung ganito. Yung may padulas na triangle. So, yung padulas na triangle dito is yung variables letter N, or pwedeng letter A din, variables letter A, and then variable na letter pwedeng C. Sabihin natin yung C. Yung A under slippery slope is hindi naman siya harmful. It's not a non-harmful claim. Pero because of the series of events that we indicated in the statements, merong series kaya siya pa-slope. Interconnected siya. Interconnected, may series of events here which resulted to the effect of the C. Yung result ng C is a very harmful proposition. Nagkakaroon ng exaggerated na proposition. So para siyang strawman pero under slippery slope, it's obvious that there are a lot of series of events that are included. So parang parang pinahabang false cause for the slippery slope. For the weak analogy kasi, ang ibig sabihin ng analogy, we are comparing two variables. Okay, the variable A and then variable B. So for analogy, tandaan natin yung letter C. kinukumpara natin yung letter A tsaka letter B. So, ibig sabihin, under this fallacy, there are properties present under variable A that are also present for variable B. Okay, the example that we gave here was the example yung LED TV and then yung kotse. So, kung may qualities sa present, sabihin natin yung quality 1 and quality 2 present sa letter A, makikita rin natin na yung quality 1 and quality 2 present din sa letter B. And then we just discovered that there's a quality 3 present in variable A. Does that mean that quality 3 is also present in variable B? Now, if we assume that the same quality is also present under variable B, we're committing the fallacy of weak analogy. So, meaning to say, it doesn't necessarily follow that since there's a consistent pattern of qualities 1 and 2 present on those two variables, it doesn't necessarily follow that the same next variable or property, which is property 3, is also present in variable B. Alright, that's for weak analogy. Okay, that would be the last slide for this discussion, and then we're going to discuss next meeting another new topic. Alright, thank you for listening and good luck to your next activity.